Today we're asking, what will it take to build communities with well-rested leaders? Welcome to Rooted, Rested, and Renewed. This is the first of a three-part series of the Intersection podcast. The Intersection is a project of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, built to create space for those on the front lines of health, healthcare, and grassroots organizing to share how they're working to build anti-racist healthcare systems. I'm your host, Carmen D. Harris, and today we're starting where all transformation begins, with ourselves. Here, we believe rest is a critical investment that supports the overall health and well-being of society. And rephrasing Audre Lorde's poetry and politic into rest is not a luxury, rest is leadership. And for those at the front lines of ensuring health is not a privilege but a right, rest is a critical practice necessary to shape a reimagined global health system and to address manifestations of structural racism in policy, practice, and resource flows. Before we start, we'll begin by being rooted. Let us receive 3 collective breaths. Place the tip of your tongue at the roof of your mouth, just behind the ridges, and begin to bring your attention to your inhales and your exhales. As you breathe in and out through your nose, you are signaling to your parasympathetic nervous system that you are safe and you are calm. As you're rooted, let us begin. I am joined by Imani Samuels and Esther Boykin. Thank you for joining us. Esther, would you introduce yourself to the Intersection community, please?
Hi, I'm Esther Boykin, a cultural strategist and consultant with more than 20 years' experience as a licensed marriage and family therapist. As the founder of Esther B Consulting, I help leaders transform burnout into sustainable, equity-centered ways of working and leadership practices that are grounded in self-compassion.
Thank you, Esther, for joining us. Imani?
Thanks for having me, Carmen. I am Imani Joy Samuels. I'm the founder of Huru, and I'm a contemplative guide whose work sits at the intersection of rest, healing, freedom, and flourishing. I draw on a multitude of multi-faith wisdom, my lived experience, and my studies in spirituality, health, and social systems. I create reflective spaces that support individual and collective restoration, especially within systems shaped by chronic exhaustion. I'm also the creator of Elderberry, which is a spirit-led AI companion for slowing down and deepening clarity, navigating life with tenderness and integrity. I'm a wife and mother of 2 young, curious feminists. Thanks for having me.
Let's jump into the conversation, y'all. Imani, I'll begin with you. What led you to your current work, and how do you define rest as a practice?
So I am a first generation rest seeker, which means that I have inherited a culture within my family that breeds and prides itself on productivity. I experienced chronic exhaustion and existential crisis, as well as debilitating anxiety in my marketing and product development career for over 16 years. And at the tail end of that, was introduced to a new skill set and competency in the tech world. That moment in time really is what ushered me into the practice and the knowing awareness of what stillness and rest is. And I define that through some studies that I've had across the multi-faith realm as existence and awareness of existence without action. So my mere presence is enough to be worthy of this moment, of this breath, without needing to do anything else. And to the extent that we can belabor that into our daily regimen, that's the embodied practice of rest that I define today.
Thank you for that. I love how it weaves itself into even Webster's dictionary definition of rest. And I'll share that. Rest is freedom for activity or labor. It's the absence of motion, a place for stopping or breathing, peace of mind or spirit, a rhythmic silence, a brief pause, something used for support. And in my practices, I've seen that rest creates an opportunity for spaciousness, as you said, stillness, to reflect, realign, and renew. And in order to transform systems, we have to create space for pause, for reimagination. And that's what rest offers us. I've supported several movement leaders and organizers as a mind body coach. And organizers often would respond in critical moments. They're working long hours, they're weathered by shouldering the causes. Esther, I know that you work with Black women, those leading some of our healthcare organizations, like the ones that are represented in the intersection. I'm very curious if you can share with us signals your clients may have ignored or the emotional toll that you have noticed in your clients of working in unjust systems.
I love this question because I love working with leaders. And I think that there are so many very subtle signs. And so what I notice a lot is often really small things like the ways in which their schedules operate. The number of particularly women that I work with, but leaders where we are fighting to find time in their schedule for lunch, for bathroom breaks. And they seem small. We kind of laugh off the silliness of having such a crazy schedule. That can seem at the surface like it is indicative of a busy schedule, high demand, but part of it is working in an unjust system tends to move us to a place of decentering ourselves and our needs and our very basic needs like food and water and all the other bio breaks that are involved, and leads to a way of working that doesn't actually model the health and the wellness that these leaders are actually trying to implement systemically, not just for patients, but across the organizations. And the toll really does become, I think about Imani's definition around rest, right? This idea that our existence in and of itself is enough. And we get that in terms from a self-worth place, but also we're talking about people who are leading, who really are at a place where their hustle, that kind of overproduction, is no longer the most valuable thing they have to offer an organization. It is in fact their existence, their presence. And feeling like you are in a system that does not value that, whether that is communicated directly or indirectly through policies and other lack of resources and things like that, really does begin to become a way of being that is unconscious. And then that obviously sort of trickles down into a lot of different kinds of behaviors and habits and things that impact their wellness. But I think about that part very acutely, that these are leaders, in particular the women I work with, but across the board, all of these leaders where we need their presence. Their presence actually can help shift the culture, help drive new policy, have the impacts that we're all really committed to. But because of the systems that they've inherited and they're existing in, sometimes they no longer get to see that part of themselves.
Esther, you're reminding me of how I met Imani. I have a personal story that's quite like the women that you were working with. I was working in a public health organization meant to save lives through physical activity, and I thought I was going to lose mine. I was at my unhealthiest weight for myself, for my body. I wasn't sleeping. I had chronic anxiety and stress. And I was so driven by the mission. The mission was so important to me that it felt like it was so necessary to save these lives. It felt like if I did not get up and do this work, that all these other Black women were going to die. And I was exchanging my life for the lives of others. And I imagine, particularly in the work that we do, that folks are very mission driven. We're looking toward health equity. And so on my very last day of work, once I quit that job, I turned to Huru. and I met Imani and came into the practice with her. I imagine, Imani, that you also see folks who are experiencing a level of burnout or exhaustion from the mission-driven work that we do. Can you share a little bit more about how one may start to shift themselves into a practice of rest?
Sure. The first thing I always invite folks into, whether they're coming to Huru formally or we're just having a conversation and we're in exploration, is to literally own their breath, to be aware of it, to anchor into it. It is the only thing that we have that we can identify control over, agnostic of wherever we are. It is the easiest access that we have to pause. And so that's the lowest common denominator. The easiest thing to do is to anchor into the breath. The other thing that I started to do when I had shared a similar experience, one of the signs that I ignored was people actually telling me that I was tired. So there were folks who were mirroring back to me. My girls are part of those folks. They were young, from the mouth of babes, saying, "Mommy, you're always so tired." And me ignoring them was my resistance to stay in this fight to help save people, exactly like you described, Carmen. And I think that has been a paradigm that we as women have adopted, and other leaders, both professionally and personally, is this notion to care. Our worth is defined by our level to care. And so owning that breath really reclaims what we are alive to do and to be. The other thing is waking up with the intention to be well is immensely helpful and grateful moving through life. So even today, I think, Esther, you woke up with the intention to go to yoga. Carmen, you woke up with the intention to be well. And so you walked as a result of it. So to wake up and say, how do I want to feel today versus responding to any noise that is outside of our body is really helpful. Research shows that if you try to overcome a negative experience, you need 12 positive experiences to do that. So you have to be really intentional on a daily basis to really get to your embodied wisdom and the embodied presence that you need.
Yeah, I love that so much. I want to shift us a little bit because there is in our conversation this cultural zeitgeist of workplace burnout and exhaustion. The signs and the responsibility for solving burnout often lay on the individual. Yes, we can set our intentions. Yes, I can breathe and meditate. Yes, a 6-month sabbatical sounds amazing. But I'm very curious about how we would start to design our communities and our workplace, in our home, that includes rest as an active process. We didn't just get here by ourselves. This is a design. And so I'm very curious, Esther or Imani, what do you all think about? What would it take to design a community or a workplace that includes rest as an active practice?
This is so much at the heart of the work that I do. I talk a lot about, communal care and collective care and curate retreats and do all these things because of exactly what you just said, Carmen. So much of treating burnout, dealing with things like compassion fatigue, even we're talking about how do you develop a rest practice, is positioned or presented to us in ways that make it extremely individual. And as you said, it is a much larger design that gets us here. We can talk about self-care, and of course self-care is valuable, but I often talk with clients, with friends, with everybody about developing a self-compassion practice. And in part that is because one of the pillars of self-compassion is recognizing our own connection to others, and recognizing then, therefore, for me to be well is intertwined with the wellness of my connection to others' well-being. And so I think about that from a rest perspective in terms of how do we think about what does our schedule look like? What does time away, time off look like? What do mornings look like? When I was managing a much larger team, I was really intentional about like, how do we start our meetings? Like I think about the beginning of my day, but like, what does our meetings beginning look like? How can we start from a place where we pause and we take a breath, where we do a little bit of check-in, where we're building in a sense of rest rather than urgency, even when the topics on the agenda feel like life and death and are in fact urgent, that we can actually begin to, as leaders, model how we bring some of our individual practices into a more collective communal practice. And I think that begins to open us up to the idea that there is a way to design what we do as groups of people that bring rest into the forefront without abandoning what else is really important.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that. Thinking about how you're starting meetings, I would think about how I interact with other individuals outside of my organizations, particularly when I'm requesting something, asking them how much time do they need rather than requesting something with a made up deadline that may feel urgent. I have a coach that always says urgency is violent to the nervous system. So, if we can create workplace practices and relationships with others into which you create more space, we can start to design rest into how we relate to one another, particularly in the workplace. Imani, I'm very curious about your thoughts on designing rest into a community or even a home.
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of conversations about this in the past where we say you have to create the conditions in order to live the way you desire. And one thing that holds true specifically in the workplace is this notion of accountability. We can express our desires, but we also have to have partners, colleagues, leaders, direct reports who hold us accountable to what we've expressed as our goals. So if we have these stated goals, and it's important to say them out loud and for everyone to have the same shared understanding. If I want to eat every day, someone has to say, you said you wanted to eat every day, and I witness you not doing that. And so being really honest and okay, and then forgiving ourselves for sometimes slacking a little bit on what we've expressed. I'd say the other thing is resting in community is powerful. So we have these ideals of resting alone, but resting in community can actually raise all tides. So that could mean going on a walk together in silence. That could mean sitting in a conference room and co-working together and then taking a pause at the same time. And then for the home, the family is really where it begins. And folks learn all types of things. You model the behaviors that you try to instill, but there being a purpose for the space where you rest is also really important. So designing your space and cultivating your home so that every room has its purpose and there is a room or a space that is designed specifically for rest. And everyone knows that. The family knows that when they come in, you take your shoes off, you do whatever you need to. You sit on the mat, you have a cushion that can hold you. Or the earth that can hold you, there being some shared space in the home where all can come to rest together.
One last question for you all. What brings you hope that designing communities and healthcare systems that include well rested leaders is possible?
I'll jump in and say, honestly, conversations like this gives me hope. Conversations like this, the work that Imani does, the work that I'm doing, the work that I know that you're doing, Cart, like being able to just see people and again, doing it in ways that bring others along. Just the conversation alone, I think, helps to shift the way that we think about this. That makes me very optimistic about our ability to move from a place of like contemplating what's possible to actually beginning to like implement that as real strategy inside of organizations and also just inside of our individual lives.
Imani?
I love these conversations as well. So I echo Esther. I also think there are places that are doing it really well. These kind of outside in case studies where we can see in Bhutan, they've redesigned their whole society to be well. They're measuring economy based on happiness and the gross happiness index versus this gross domestic product. So I can see how other places have embraced this notion of rest. There are siestas in some places, there are Sabbaths in some places. So seeing it means to me that it is attainable and it gives me a little bit more confidence that we can actually implement it here as well.
Thank you both for being here, for pausing with us, and thank you, listeners, for breathing with us, for reflecting on rest as a critical investment in health and well-being of the society. And until next time, let us remember that rest is not a luxury, rest is leadership. The views expressed here do not necessarily reflect the views of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. The Foundation does not support lobbying efforts, including any activities, examples, or communications referenced during this podcast.